Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. Last week, we had a 5-day summit on Ukraine. And I thought that as we begin our program, which will be on the Tao of activism, it would be good to just summarize what we learned and the programs that covered the 5 days so that we have a sense of where the world is with Ukraine as we contemplate how we understand that conflict and what we need to do about it. We aired many perspectives, and I think that's very important for us to take in, that in a very complex world, there are many things that come into play for any kind of accomplishment, but in this instance, any kind of major conflict. You know, Shakespeare once said that no great act was ever done with a single motive, and that is particularly true of Ukraine. Starting point is what the mass media in Europe and in North America is telling us about Ukraine, which in some sense is one of the fractals of the Ukrainians fighting for their sovereignty and their freedom against the Russian invasion to secure a land bridge to Crimea so that they have access to the Black Sea. That's true. The Ukrainians, after several thousand years of being ruled and dominated by other powers, the last 250 years dominated by Russia, in fact, which controlled Ukraine and controlled Crimea. Beginning in 1991, the Ukrainians were finally independent and sovereign, one of the newest countries in the world. And so that fight for freedom is something that we hear a lot about, and the ferociousness with which the Ukrainians are fighting for that sovereignty is, from their point of view, the most important thing in the world. And what we also saw is that there's other points of view, and this particularly came clear in our initial program that started the 5-day summit with a dialogue with Vladimir Posner, who is simultaneously Russian, American, and French, who speaks all three languages completely fluently and without an accent, having been born and raised in the United States and then spent time in Russia, time in France, and now resides in Russia, but travels very widely and comments on the last 30 years. And what he pointed out is that this is also fundamentally a titanic conflict between the United States on the one side, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union in December of 1991, began the process of moving U.S. forces and NATO forces to the east to consolidate American imperial control over Eastern Europe, as it has over Western Europe. And the largest geostrategic fact in the world right now is the consolidation of U.S. and NATO power over Eastern Europe. The United States has made it clear since the early 1990s that the goal is not only to seize Eastern Europe and consolidate military and economic power in Eastern Europe, but to deprive Russia of Crimea, to essentially emasculate Russia, and eventually to break up Russia. That has been the goal of U.S. policy for 30 years now. And that's why you hear about regime change in Moscow. So that's the American position. So even as the Ukrainians have their perspective, the Americans have their perspective. The United States is the largest empire, maybe in the history of the world. and it wants to dominate all of Europe. It wants to break up Russia. And the Russians know that. So that's why Vladimir Putin in 2008, after the United States announced that Ukraine was going to be the next country to be absorbed into NATO, the Russians said, this is a red line. We're not going to let this happen. The United States persisted. And what did Russia do? It seized Crimea. And last year, it seized that part of Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine, to secure Russian access to the Black Sea, which it has to have as a great power. So what we have in Ukraine, in addition to the sovereignty of Ukraine, is what I've called the irresistible force of American expansion, meeting the immovable object of Russian nationalism, which is made more acute in the Russian psyche, because this is the third great attempt on the part of the West, first by Napoleon in 1812, then by Hitler in 1941, and now the United States since 2008, and particularly since the coup in 2014, to move to the Russian border and dismember Russia. So that's the American perspective and the Russian perspective. And in the middle of it, Ukraine is a battlefield and is in the process of being destroyed. And there's now emerging another perspective, and that's the Chinese. The Chinese are way off there in Asia. They see what the United States is doing. They know that if the United States consolidates in Ukraine and deprives Russia of Crimea, breaks Russia up, they're next. The United States has made that clear. It also talks about regime change in China. So the Chinese, from their perspective, are seeing this war in Europe, and they know that it's in their strategic interest to back Russia. And so the United States finds itself taking on Russia, taking on China. And that's what makes Ukraine so dangerous. You have three superpowers, each from their own perspective, understanding the gravity of what's going on in Ukraine, preparing themselves for war. And each one of them have nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. Already, the United States is moving nuclear weapons into Eastern Europe. It's building bases in Lithuania and Poland and other places. Russia has said that it will use nuclear weapons to protect what it's taken, to secure the land bridge in Crimea. The Chinese have said they'll never start a nuclear war. But if someone attacks them with nuclear weapons, they will attack with the full force of the Chinese arsenal. It has been nearly 100 years in world history where the major powers of the world have now started to come into formation for a global conflict. It happened in 1912, 1913, before the World War I. It happened in the late 1930s before World War II. And now it's happening with Ukraine. And everywhere around Western Europe and the United States, the media is cheering the war, escalating the war. And the Russians are consolidating their position with increasing support from China and the global South. So the conclusion of our summit on Ukraine was we're now looking at the prospect of global war. And all of us just need to take this in. that somehow we need a ceasefire. We need the activation of diplomacy. And there doesn't seem to be anything like that on the horizon. And so the dangers of nuclear exchange grow day by day. And that's why Humanity Rising is focusing on it, and why we're going to be doing more summits on this conflict over the next several months in April and again in June for as long as the conflict continues. Because this conflict is not only subsuming the empires into the mobilization for war, it is destabilizing the entire global order right at the moment when the global order needs to be fully harmonized and cooperating in order to take on the real issues, and that is runaway climate change. So the precariousness of the world situation could not be more dangerous. And the need for citizens to speak up and demand a ceasefire and demand diplomacy could not be more urgent. And so this is one of the reasons why we partnered with Code Pink. And the co-moderator last week was Jody Evans, one of the founders of Code Pink, peace organization founded by women. It refers to itself as a feminist peace organization. It's one of the most dynamic peace organizations anywhere in the world. And they've been mobilizing marches and protests globally. There was a major protest in Berlin, also in London. There's protests beginning to take shape for the 18th of March across the United States. And so, as we always do with Humanity Rising, we try to look reality right in the eye, as we've tried to do with Ukraine. But we are always looking for the opportunities in the crisis. How can we, in this particular case with Ukraine, how can we seize this crisis, transmute it into an opportunity for peace? And that requires all of us to take action, to understand, to talk with our neighbors, to call our congressional representatives. And if you're watching from Europe, to call your representatives in the European Parliament or your national government. But just like with climate change, we know that the governments aren't going to do anything on their own. So with the conflict in Ukraine, the governments are not going to do this on their own. They need the pressure of an informed public. So that's what we're going to be seeking as we convene these dialogues, is how do we mobilize all of us to take the kind of action that we need urgently to take. And that's what brings us to the session for today. This is on the Tao of social action, with a perspective drawn from Asia and that ancient classical document, the Tao Te Ching. You all know the image of the Tao and the yin and the yang, and in every yang there's a yin, and every yin there's a yang, in a perpetual cyclic motion, the dance of oneness. So that's what we're going to be delving into, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, we want to invite in Mary Frances Drake, who's been on our program before. She's a professor of psychology at the University of Massachusetts, and she's been doing a course for our wisdom school at Ubiquity University on the elder woman, how mature women can take the transformations in their bodies and in their lives and sculpt and mold sageness and elderhood. And the course was so successful that we're offering another course that's going to start in a week or so. And we wanted Mary Frances just to come on to provide an opening meditation for us, but also to speak about the poignancy of elderhood for women. because God knows we need the feminine, and we need the leadership of women in the world today as we experience the escalating turbulence that we see all around us. So Mary Frances Drake, I want to welcome you to turn on your video and put yourself off mute. And after Mary Frances opens us with a meditation and a few words about her course, she'll turn the program back over to me, and I'll introduce our presenter for today. But thank you, Mary Frances, and welcome.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here with you again. As I was listening to your introduction this morning and thinking about all that's happening in the Ukraine and all of the various forces that are involved, as a psychologist and a contemplative mystic, I could feel the larger archetypal struggle happening in this macrocosm of our Earth, and how one of the ways that a contemplative approaches such things is to have an internal process that mirrors the external process. So if we think about ourselves, and in the course that I'm teaching on women, the first course was called Transforming from Midlife Woman to Wise Woman. So similarly, our world is transforming from a world that is at the mercy of the pressures, say, political and otherwise, and transforming into the wisdom of the Mother Earth, the wisdom of recognizing that there's a fever on the Mother Earth that we call climate change, and recognizing that the wisdom needs to arise to put a stop to it. And historically and archetypally, the wise woman is the one who says, enough is enough. Enough is enough, to all the factors involved. So psychologically speaking, we might look at these three superpowers as the id, ego, and superego, and you can apply those to those three superpowers as you see fit. But at the center of that, and what I feel in this archetypal way that Ukraine represents, is the true self, the true nature of ourself, fighting for liberation, fighting for freedom from the oppression of all of these forces that we have been at the mercy of for so long. And there is Ukraine, a very small central place, fighting fiercely for its own sovereignty and liberation. And so in my course that I'm teaching, I'm actually asking women to look at that. What are the oppressing factors in their life and development? How do they push them back and reclaim their own sovereignty as a woman, and then look into themselves and find what are they here to do? What is their message, their wisdom voice, their wisdom message that they came to bring to the earth? And if the psyches of women arise in this way, the feminine wisdom arises, there will be a movement towards balancing this out of control, negative and toxic masculinity that looks like war and power play into something that is more collaborative and connective and supportive. And for me, as a contemplative, I feel that that looks like it requires an inside job as well as the external dynamic. And I do truly believe that the reclaiming our own sovereignty will give us each the ability to make the impact that we're here to make, and we need everyone to do that. So the next class that I'm teaching is called Wise Woman Emerging, and it's the continuation, a deeper dive into that process of finding, excavating, reclaiming, and expressing the vision and the mission that each woman has. And I think that's true for every person in humankind, to determine what does the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible look like, as Charles Eisenstein would say. And so I'd like to lead a meditation today, moving into Bill's talk about the Tao, and having us go inside to find the place of peace in ourself, out of which will spring our own wisdom, out of which will spring our own contribution to that reclamation of the sovereign nature of humankind, of the kind human, and how that will express in Bill's program shortly. So I hope you'll join me in taking a few moments to gather yourself. It's sometimes hard to extract yourself from the external, and all of this information about the Ukraine and all the powers it's very disturbing. It's a disturbing force. So it's easy to get drawn away from ourselves in the disturbance, to get distracted by the external play that's happening. But if we can cut the ties with that for a few moments and be restored to ourselves, then we can see more clearly in ourselves what is it that we're here to do. Where is our piece, our contribution to the mind of the world that requires that we emanate and radiate a sense of peacefulness, a sense of anchoring in the importance of life and the continuing life on our planet, and also anchoring in the desire, or what I would call prayer, for there to be peace on earth, for there to be a more beautiful world that we're evolving into, that we're helping to shape with our own thoughts, our own words, our own actions. So if you take a few breaths and let go of all of the things that would distract you from finding that place in yourself, we can go there for a few moments and cultivate some positive energy to radiate out across our planet, but first in our own planet, in our own earth here, in each one of our bodies. So let's begin there. So relaxing your body into your chair and closing your eyes and focusing toward your breath. That's the first layer of letting go. And then we want to allow our minds to go quiet. So taking another deep breath and imagine yourself walking from your thinking mind down to your heart, as if you're walking down a stairway. And as you go down, just turn the lights off as you leave, with the intention of having a quiet mind. Just feel the quiet come over you as you land in your heart center. And feel for a moment what your heart feels about all of this, the disturbance, the fear, the struggle, the hope. And now allow the heart with your breath to go calm. Calmness that is a reassurance, an eternal reassurance that there's a greater plan that we are participating in. And so let your heart go calm. Feel your shoulders relax and your face relax as your mind is quiet and your heart is calm. And you let your body sink into deeper relaxation in your chair. Just feeling the breath fill your abdomen, fill your rib cage, all the way up to your shoulders, to your collarbone, and releasing it, releasing it, releasing it. And you can sigh out all of the struggle and pressure and worry about such things while you take up residence in yourself and in the present moment. Let's do a few rounds of peaceful breathing where we breathe in peace and we breathe out peace. Breathe in peace. Breathe out peace. Breathe in peace. Breathe out peace. And as the essence of peace fills your being, imagine it radiating from your heart, not only your own peace, but for your desire for peace. So we fuel the radiance with our desire. The desire for peace in our being, the desire for peace in our home, the desire for peace in our community, in our country, and in our world. So every in-breath, breathe in peace, and every out-breath, breathe out peace through your own body, your own home, your own community, your own country, and our world. and see that radiance from your heart, from your being, sending a wave of peace that changes the energy and the mind of the world, that tips it a little bit further into toward the tipping zone of a peaceful world that we create, each one of us and all of us together. Breathing in peace and radiating peace out with the exhalation across our planet. And breathing in peace, and this time breathing out peace to our planet, to Mother Earth, to the intelligent being of matter, the Mother, and pouring that peace into the heart of the Mother, hoping that our intention for peace will soothe the fever of the Mother. Breathing in peace and breathing peace into the heart of the Mother, who only wants her children to be at peace with one another. I hope that your internal energy has shifted in this short meditation, and I hope that you'll open your consciousness and your heart to receive the wisdom that our friend Bill has to offer about the Tao. Peace to you. I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thank you, Mary Frances. It was a very empowering meditation today, so I just want to acknowledge that and recognize your skill as a meditation teacher, but also as a professor, and encourage anyone who has the time to take the course, because I think you'll be as enthused as the students who are taking her current course and be empowered thereby. So thank you. I want to now introduce Bill Merton. He's a Taoist scholar and author. He works with people and groups to understand the way of the Tao. He's written a number of books, The Sages Tao Te Ching, The Parents Tao Te Ching, The Activists Tao Te Ching, and the Tao Te Ching of Forgiveness. And so he's very much immersed, and it was by synchronicity that as we were preparing for the summit on Ukraine that we knew would be challenging for people, because these are very, very tough issues to contemplate. It's almost like looking the sun right in the eye without blinking. We would probably all benefit if in the aftermath of that contemplation, we would have someone talk to us about quietistic activism and active quietism from the point of view of that very powerful wisdom text from ancient China, the Tao Te Ching. So I want to welcome Bill to the program. He's going to make a presentation, and then we'll dialogue for the balance of the time. So Bill, welcome to Humanity Rising.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. And express something that is a incredibly difficult paradox, an active quietism. I'd like to begin by reading something that I wrote a month or so ago in a post in my website. The past holiday season, Nancy, my spouse, and I watched an old recording of the Peter, Paul, and Mary holiday special. It was recorded back in 1988. And listening to it was a terribly emotional experience for me. The songs stirred feelings and images that were formed in me during the 60s and 70s. And this, for me, at my age, this was a time when the intensity of my hope for a new world was strong. I attended university in Berkeley in the mid-60s. And I played banjo and sang with the bluegrass folk group during those years. And our dreams got fueled by the familiar songs. We crossed paths with Joan Baez and Pete Seeger and Peter, Paul, and Mary. And all of these songs became expressions of our inner landscape. So in this holiday special, as Peter, Paul, and Mary sang, "Don't let the light go out," and "This land is your land," and "We shall overcome," and "Blowing in the wind," and many others, tears came to my eyes. And I look back at these emotions during that concert, and I see a wistfulness and a sadness, because the apparent reality is that hatred and bigotry, the weapons of unbridled capitalism and corporate power, have triumphed. A wedge has been driven in the population of the world, fragmenting us into seemingly irreconcilable shards. And it's hard to see a possibility of unity and peace, certainly not based on the current paradigm. Because the feeling in my heart was that the light has gone out. And this land does not belong to you and me. And we have not overcome. And there are many seas yet for the white dove to sail before she can sleep in the sand. Many more ears to listen before we can hear people cry. But I don't despair. This is the inevitable result of the incredible leverage that economic power brings to those who seek it. Public opinion for a sizable proportion of the population can be purchased, manipulated, and controlled through fear and falsehoods masquerading as fact and truth. Yet the light that seems to have been extinguished in the torch that I felt that we carried back then will be rekindled by a fire that still burns in the souls and the depths of a dispersed people. It's like hope and light have gone underground for the time being, and the power of authentic spirit and true human kindness remains, and it flourishes in the tendrils that unite hundreds of millions of people around the world, unbeknownst to them. It has thousands of expressions through various spiritualities and practices and communities and movements that seem diverse, but in reality are part of one thing. Like one organism, like mycelia, like the mycelia in a forest that has millions of miles of tendrils that unite the entire forest underground. And one day that underground movement will emerge because kindness is still there and compassion is still there, and it breaks out in unexpected places because of this inner fire. And I take hope in this, because you and I are part of this interconnected life that can seem conquered and dispersed, but that's simply a yin cycle of history, because compassion, joy, and freedom actually grow stronger in the hidden places. They gain spiritual strength when they're undisturbed by power struggles over toys and trinkets. This is my song of hope that will go to the quiet places for the earth and the sky and the wind and the water tell us of what's truly important. And we'll hear the whispers that chaos seeks to silence but cannot. And we'll experience the authentic, simple joys and delights of tastes and textures and aromas and sounds and sights that commerce would seek to displace and sell back to us, but it can't. And our strength will grow in unseen worlds, rather than being dissipated in frenetic fuss and fury. And we won't despair. And when Dylan asks, how many roads? We'll reply, a few more yet, Bob. A few more yet. But someday. Paul Stuckey asked me to go ahead and write a song, an actual song about that, but I told him that my banjo has disappeared many decades ago and he'd have to write the song. And he did. He wrote a beautiful little song, and you can find a link to it on my website in the post entitled How Many Roads. He still writes beautiful songs. It's that hidden, that underground work that I feel is the essential component of a new activism. Now, when I say new activism, I'm going to go back and see if I can recapture what I sensed was, for me, an old activism. My introduction to classic activism was in Berkeley in the 1960s. Long ago for some of you. This was a time on the university campus that was filled with turmoil and exploration. Now, I was an engineering student. And for those of you of that age, I carried a slide rule around on my belt. That's how long ago this was. And I wasn't exactly primed for social action. We engineers tended to keep our heads down and walk across campus as quietly as we could, but there was no way of avoiding what was going on. The civil rights movement and the Vietnam War impinged on our lives and called us to something. And I was absolutely confused. I had no idea what to do. I was still very much a child. Spent many years very much a child, as many of you will understand and have spent yourself. My connection with social issues was newborn, and I didn't know what to do. And one day I was walking by the Presbyterian church there in Berkeley, and I don't remember what it was that attracted me, but I went back the next Sunday, and that changed my life. I was introduced in that particular church to a combination of deep spirituality and social engagement. It was still confusing to me. I didn't know what to do with my life. The Vietnam War was raging. I had to make some choices. If I were to do it again, I would make different choices. But the adolescent that I was decided that the Navy would be what he'd do. And so I spent 4 years with the Navy. And during that time, I was introduced by a martial arts instructor to the Tao Te Ching, this little book, this little ancient, confusing, beautiful, enigmatic book from 2 millennia ago in China, fell into my hands and became gradually through my life the ground, the place that I could finally put my feet. After 4 years with the Navy, I wanted to continue to integrate spirituality in my life, so I went to seminary. That I majored in counseling, pastoral counseling, and then tried being a clergyman, tried being a minister. It didn't work for me. Instead of introducing me into a deep, contemplative spirituality, it tended to introduce me into a mid-level management position in an institution that was struggling to survive. And I felt like a stray dog at a Whistler's convention, and I couldn't really live that way. And I eventually left being an active minister and went into private practice as a counselor and spent most of the rest of my life in that private practice. So my classic activism was formed in Berkeley, and it led to burnout, as I think it led many of us into a world of burnout. Not more than 15 or 20 years later, there was that feeling of I just can't keep living this angry, frustrated, marching, protesting, fist in the air sort of movement. I remember one day I was part of a planning committee for bringing one of the world's most foremost speakers on world hunger to a conference in Phoenix. And we were at a planning meeting one time. And I was in the living room, and they had the TV on with the the volume off. And I saw on the screen this, what looked like a fundamentalist preacher who was just pounding the pulpit and pointing and doing this, just letting us know what sinners we were. And I said, what have you guys got that crap on for? And they looked at me with wide eyes and said, that's our speaker. And I remember that feeling of, are we really just the Tweedledee of the Tweedledum of angry finger pointing? And I backed away from activism. I couldn't keep doing it that way. And I found my refuge, as I did at many of the transitions in my life, with this silly little book, the Tao Te Ching, this enigmatic, this paradoxical, this beautiful poetic book, the Tao Te Ching. It was written 2,600 years ago, legendarily by the Chinese sage Lao Tzu. It's 5,000 Chinese characters, divided into 81 chapters of simple poems expressing the Tao, the way, the mysterious essence of the universe. Legend has it that Lao Tzu got fed up with culture of his time. He lived during the Warring States period of China, a time of the consolidation of power in urban areas, the draining of resources from the countryside into the urban area, conflict among several states that were trying to create dynasties, and he left. He got on his ox and headed for the mountains, but as he got to the pass, the gatekeeper wouldn't let him go and said, "Master, before you go, you must write down your wisdom." And he said, "If I wrote it down, it wouldn't be the Tao." Nevertheless, he wouldn't let him pass until he wrote it down. So Lao Tzu got off his ox, sat under a tree, took out his brush and ink, and in one afternoon wrote down those 5,000 characters that became the Tao Te Ching. He tossed it to the gatekeeper, got back on the ox, and disappeared into the mountains. Believe me, there are many times when I would like to find an ox and disappear into the mountains. Do you know the feeling? He left this gift with us. He was an anarchist, a peaceful anarchist, a bit of a rural idealist. And the title of the book, Tao Te Ching, simply means, Ching means book. De, Te, means natural virtue, natural power, that intrinsic quality that is in every living being that enlivens them, and that as it flows through them, expresses the truth of their being. And Tao means way or path, or in this case, the mysterious way that the universe unfolds. So the title Tao Te Ching means the book of the way of the natural power that flows in all living beings. And that's the foundation of what might be called a new activism. I'm going to look at some of the qualities, some of the precepts of the Tao Te Ching. One of the first precepts is that there is only one thing happening, and we are part of that one thing happening. I'm going to see if I can share the screen here and give you a bit of a preview. I think what you see on your screen here is a little graph that I've made. Below this dotted line is what the Chinese call Wu Qi. This shaded area is the unmanifest nature of existence. Wu means negation. Qi means form. It's no form. It's what quantum physicists would call the quantum flux. That hidden, mysterious, dark, unformed place from which all forms in the Big Bang, everything emerged from this Wu Qi. And the little arrow shows it manifesting in the Tai Chi, or the manifest cosmos. Excuse me, got a throat. You know the little yin-yang symbol, the light and the dark. That's called the Tai Chi, which means the grand ultimate, or the manifest. So from a Taoist perspective, everything that exists comes from a deep, mysterious, empty, formless place. That's its root. That's its mysterious essence. And it forms through yin and yang into the universe we see. And the yin-yang symbol is very much like a physicist would describe atomic structure. It's this dance of positive and negative energy, the dance of the proton and the electron and the subatomic particles, without which nothing would exist. So the Wu Qi gives birth to the Tai Chi. Now it's into this Tai Chi from the Wu Qi that the being emerges. Let's look at this little half circle here as the infant. The infant emerges from the womb, not just the mother's womb, but the womb of the unmanifest, that deep, dark place where everything is formed. And here this little being pops their head out into the manifest cosmos. And you can see in an infant's eyes that it's still just part of the unmanifest. It's still part of oneness. It has no sense of being separate. It's just looking around, probably with a sense of, holy, what in the world? But that oneness is still there. That's the infant. This developmental stage that I'm explaining to you, I owe that to a professor I had long ago named Sam Keen, who had this lovely developmental stage of infant and then child, and I'll explain it as we go along. So now the infant starts having experiences from the manifest world. And those experiences of, oh, there goes a form, there's a sound, there's a feeling, there's a breeze, there's a ball, there's a person. And the brain starts categorizing the experiences of the manifest world and creates this sense of identity that's still tied very directly to the deep soul essence that's part of the mystery. So the child, through imagination and through play, still connects with this mystery, with this thing that can't be expressed in words, that has to have imaginative metaphors and poems and plays, and it's part of the child's nature. At least it should be. But in a culture like ours, the child is pretty quickly told that we leave behind these imaginative things, and we become adolescents. And Sam Keen calls this the rebel stage. And notice that the line between the identity and the soul is starting to get darker and darker. And the connection between the soul and the ego identity is getting less and less. And at this point, the adolescent turmoil is because something is being left behind. We can't articulate it. We don't have words for it. We don't live in a culture that gives us words for it. Some cultures do. If we lived in a culture that explained to us what was happening, that we were starting to get disconnected from our soul, we'd do so much better in articulating and growing spiritually and psychologically, but we don't. We live in a culture that says, become a strong, ego-centered adult. And the youth doesn't know what to do with that. They'll either capitulate or they'll rebel. When I was at university, I was at this stage, and so many people at that stage don't have the strength to rebel, and if they rebel, they're outcast, and they capitulate. They go underground. They lose something, and they become an adult. And in this diagram, there's a strong line between the personality and the external world. The mysterious world is blocked off, and the ego is everything. And this is the center of gravity in our culture. This is what the child and the youth are pulled into as fast as possible, and this is where you're supposed to stay. But for the Taoist thought, and in Sam Keen's expression, this is a very temporary stage, and it shouldn't last very long at all. And we should be given the tools to, from that stage, quickly begin to go to the outlaw stage, in which we now have a formed ego, but it reconnects with the soul, with the essence, with that Te in the Tao Te Ching, that natural virtue, that natural power that comes up through us and expresses itself as us. Sam calls this the outlaw, because it's the time when we recapture some of that youthful rebellion and we say, nuts. The adult world has told me it's this and that, and I say it's not. I say it's something else. I say it's something mysterious, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life living out of that mystery. And that takes me to the sage, the lover, in which the soul and the essence becomes the center of energy of a life, expressing itself through an ego, but a fairly small ego perspective, there so that we can function in the world, but we don't take it that seriously. We use it as a transition point to express our gifts back out into the world. So from the point of view of the Tao Te Ching, my life is lived from the Wu Qi, that womb of existence, the womb of the cosmos, continues to give birth constantly through every being that exists in the cosmos, as long as they don't block it off, as long as the culture and the psychology of the culture allows for the mystery and allows for the energy to emerge from a deep, potent place, then the gifts can truly be expressed. That's how the Tao Te Ching has formed a context for a different kind of interaction for me from the world. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. I think I've come back to me here. We operate from a deeper place. We're part of one thing happening. We have a conditioned mind, a mind that has been formed by our interaction with the world, but it's not the deepest mind. There's a Tao mind. There's a deeper mind, a mind in which all potential exists. Another quality of the Tao Te Ching is the Chinese concept called Wu Wei, W-U-W-E-I. As in Wu Qi, W-U means negation and Wei means doing. And Wu Wei is not doing. In Wu Wei, doing does itself. It's not, as is sometimes caricatured in Taoist thought of, leaning back on an air mattress in the stream and just floating along, minding your own business and just being carried along. That's a caricature and it's inaccurate. Wu Wei is unself-conscious action. Not doing is doing with no resistance, without the resistance that's internally imposed by opinions and desires and goals and pressures and desires for achievement and desires to accomplish something and desires to put something in place and desires to fix things. Of course we want to do things. But Lao Tzu says that let Wu Wei do the doing. That's when the Te, the De, moves through us and doing does itself. I'm sure you've all experienced those times in your life when you've just experienced doing itself. Gardening or wrapped up in something, a conversation or a task that just eliminates the idea of ego resistance, of the resistance that's caused by desires and fears, that doing is just doing itself. When it's self-conscious, there's this desire to do something and a resistance to the doing of that, internally and externally. And it's like Newton's law, the more intention to do it there is, the more resistance there is. And in the art of Tai Chi Chuan, the physical dance, the martial arts dance that expresses Taoism, there's a movement aside and the using of resistance to just flow past us. So doing does itself. I had a Zen teacher long ago who, when talking about activism with me, said, Bill, go ahead and invest yourself in whatever stirs your soul, whatever's arising from your soul. Invest yourself in it. But try to keep these two things in mind. Don't blame anybody and don't argue with anybody. And yet so much of my early activism was filled with blame. And of course you argued. You needed to recruit people to your side. You needed to convince people that it was this, not this. That this was right and this was wrong, and here's we and here's them, and we and them will never meet. We have to convince them and they're trying to convince us. And you know how well that works, don't you? Have you ever argued somebody into a deeply felt conviction of your own? Wu Wei does not blame, does not convince, it merely does. Another quality of the Tao Te Ching is the yin and the yang, and I've mentioned that before, the Tai Chi symbol, the dark and the light. And these are polarities. These go with each other. It's like an atom can't exist without the electron and the proton. That's what makes up an atom. They can't be by themselves. It's a polarity. It's not a duality. We live in a world that tries to make things a duality. There is a this or this. There is right and there is wrong. There is my opinion and your opinion. These are separate from each other. These are not a dance. These are dualist. There is good and evil. There is God and the devil. And this is a tragic misunderstanding of the dance of yin and yang. Life is this constant dance of coming and going, success and failure, having and losing, living and dying, always going together. Trying to make life a duality is like trying to take a magnet and cut it in two and have a positive pole and a negative pole. Cut a magnet in two and you still have positive and negative. Cut it in as many pieces as you want. You still have positive and negative. You can't separate it. The yin and the yang is this dance. And in activism, it's so easy to get caught in trying to impose yang activism, that to crank the world up in that light element, to crank and crank and crank and crank and crank and get it to be what we want it to be, and then put on the brakes so that it won't continue to transform. And this is a futile waste of energy. When the dance is moving in one direction, we cooperate with it and move our energy to dance with it and bring compassion and bring healing and bring peace and bring joy and bring presence to it. Not by trying to crank things, not by rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, but by being present. We don't know or presume to understand why things may be moving in a certain direction. We're tasked with letting the energy, the natural quality of our life, coming from deep within us rather than our angry and frustrated and fearful opinions, but something deeper, express itself with us. And it's always compassionate, and it's always kind, and it's always seeking to be present. This TE, this natural virtue, is inherent in every form and being in the universe. Another quality of the Tao Te Ching is don't mistake concepts and words for the thing itself. Two very classic lines from the Tao Te Ching. One is in the first chapter. This is how Lao Tzu starts. He says, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name." And what he's expressing is, the minute I say it, that's not it. The minute something is expressed, it's expressed as a metaphor, a concept, a verbal dance. And those verbal dances and metaphors and concepts are important in our world, but it's always necessary to remember that they are not the thing itself. The God that can be spoken is not God. The truth that can be spoken is not quite the truth. We're always approximating. And the danger of our language, as what a wonderful gift language has been to humanity, the danger is that it separates us from the thing itself. The more immersed we become in language, the more isolated we become. There's me and there's the things. And I forget that there is no separation. That between me and this computer screen that I'm looking at is a dance of energy that if I had the perceptual equipment and my brain could process it, I would see just one thing. I would see a dance of energy, part of it me, part of it the air between me, part of it this silly screen, and it would be all one dance. But my perceptual equipment and my verbal abilities let me keep stepping back and stepping back and stepping back. And we live in a world in which we separate ourselves from everything. There's another famous chapter in the Tao Te Ching that gives me pause, especially right about now. That's in chapter 56, where he says, "Those who know don't speak. Those who speak don't know. Those who know don't speak. Those who speak don't know." I've spent 45 years of my life speaking about the Tao Te Ching. Does that give you some idea of maybe how much I actually know? We do speak. We have to speak. That's what we do. But we all must always remember that the attempt to know separates us. Knowing in our culture is a way of controlling. The more I know, the more I feel in control, but also the more I am separate from the things that I know. To use the word knowing means that there's me, a knower, and the thing, the known. And do you see that that's a subtle separation? Linguistically and logically, it's important for us, but it's not the reality. As we seek knowledge and as we seek information, we must always remember that we are in danger of separating ourselves. That brings us to information. Wow, the information age. For Lao Tzu, there's a huge difference between information and wisdom. Unless information is processed by a spacious heart, by the deepest part of me, instead of by the conditioned mind, it's actually disempowering. Notice how it's designed to be disempowering. The conditioned mind chooses the information it receives and then molds it into ammunition to hurl at opponents and justify actions. The spacious heart curates information very carefully. Our conditioned mind tells us a very potent lie. It says that the information we get via media, social, unsocial, tweeted, texted, written, videoed, whatever, is the real world. That's a toxic lie. The conditioned mind, this separate mind, thrives on a diet of anger, fear, and desire. And it'll go to any lengths to form and sustain habits that feed that diet. It's been going on for so long that we honestly don't notice it. And we believe that we're being good citizens and staying informed about the real world. But the mediated world is never real. We must deal with it very carefully, because what we're presented is an illusion, a facade that hides the truly real from our awareness. The real life is touches, caresses, natural surroundings, real food, authentic conversations, vistas, livelihood, slowness, rest, healing, compassion, gentleness. All the direct, unmediated experiences that surround us, but they pass unnoticed because we're blinded by the information that inundates us. Revolution, a revolution that I refer to in my book, The Activist's Tao Te Ching, is something different. It's not a turning over. It's a return to the source. It's a return to that place from which true energy and passion and action arises. Therefore, we become quiet. We calm ourselves. Lao Tzu says, "Can you sit quietly until the mud settles and the waters clear, and you can see then what right action might be?" And in the world in which we live, it is so hard to become still, but so necessary. It's the still point in our lives from which action that will be effective will emerge. We will confront power, but without hatred. We will act decisively, but without judgment. We will see things distinctly, but know that they're still part of one thing, and will be ready to live with joy and die without regret. This source that I talk about, and for Lao Tzu, he was not a religious person. His Taoism was not the folk religion of China. There is a Taoism in China, and that is the standard folk religion. It's the gods and goddesses and rituals and prayers and temples and structures and belief systems that many folk religions have. That wasn't Lao Tzu. His was a philosophical Taoism. It was not religious, but it was deeply mystical. His ideal of the Tao can't really be translated with our Western idea of God. It's not this separate deity. It's our own essential nature. It's all of us. It's the oneness. It's one thing happening of which we are a part. And we may be involved in actions and sacrifices, pains and sorrows, triumphs and failures, but we'll always know somewhere deep inside of us that we're part of one thing happening, something transcendent, something mysterious. I find that I have to cloister my life a little bit to live this way. I don't deny reality. I just question what reality is. I allow very little media in my life. Very little media. And I allow it in a very curated way. I allow more time for prayer, contemplation, and direct work. I want to look into the eyes of people. I want to be present, not with ideas, but with people. There was a time when monasteries kept alive communities, a simplified lifestyle, a focus on spiritual and communal values, personal development, physical and mental and spiritual health, and service and contribution to the world. The monastic lifestyle has gone out of favor, and there are reasons why. But the essence of what people were looking for in the best of monastic life was a place where my service, and they were servants, where my service can arise out of my silence. You probably are aware of convents and monasteries still today from which this service from silence arises. One of my primary example of the quiet activist was the beautiful man Thich Nhat Hanh. his passing this past a little more than a year ago was very sad for me. He was the quintessential social activist, from protesting the war in Vietnam and being thrown out of his country. He lived from a monastic quietness, a gentle, peaceful, compassionate social engagement. From his quietness came his action. From the decades of isolation came Nelson Mandela's Reconciliation Society. The deep, deep wells of silence are the places that we must find so that our action is natural and powerful. Well, thank you for letting me share. This has been kind of a chance to dump a little bit of my what comes up in me when I think of social action. And I try to walk that paradox of quiet activism and active quietism. And if anybody'd like to talk to me about it, please feel free. That's what I love to do. And you can reach me through my website. And now I don't know what to do now. Do I turn it back to Jim? Hello there.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much. That was sublime. That was truly sublime today, and a perfect juxtaposition to the kind of Sturm und Drang and tumult of last week as we were looking at the conflict in Ukraine and all its multidimensionality. And just to go in a sense from the dance and the waves at the top of the ocean to the bottom of the ocean, and just realize that both perspectives are all part of one totality. And it's, one taste. Mm-hmm. It's the sound of one hand clapping. It's all an integrated whole in which all of us, I always think of the blind people and the elephant. Wherever we are, even if you're Lao Tzu, you're holding a perspective that needs to be honored, but always in synthesis with other perspectives. And I really appreciated you ending with Mandela and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, and particularly Thich Nhat Hanh, because I remember while we were protesting the war in Vietnam back in the 60s and running around with, knives between our teeth, burning our draft cards and, storming the barricades. Here were these monks in Vietnam, in the center of where the war was, just completely calm, mm-hmm. and yet completely defiant, simultaneously. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. Certainly I do, day by day, particularly on Humanity Rising, where we're moving into all kinds of different areas and both crises and opportunities and solutions and visions and so forth. It's easy to be swept up in the waves at the top of the ocean and forget that the best place to experience the waves are really sitting at the bottom, kind of in the stillness. And you've brought that stillness in. So I just want to thank you for that.
It's my pleasure. It's a pleasure.
And I would love to have you address this paradox, because I do it every day, right? As you do, that the way that can be spoken is not the true way. Mm-hmm. That those that know don't speak, and those that speak don't know. Well, when you said that, I was going, yes, that's me. I'm speaking all the time and I know nothing, and of course that was the paradox that Socrates also spoke about, that he was wise because he knew that he did not know. Mm-hmm. So, how do we take action? How do we speak, knowing that we don't know, and knowing that to even speak moves in the wrong direction, even if you're the finger pointing to the moon, you're not the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to hear more from you how we wrestle with that paradox of Wu Wei
Mm-hmm.
in speaking, because that's what most of us are doing most of the time.
Mm-hmm. That's a difficult paradox for me. The only thing I just kind of blathered here for about 45 minutes, but most of the time I don't
It was
speak.
great blather, by the way.
Well, thank you. Most of the time I don't speak. I really try to live a bit of a monastic life, not in a sense of cutting myself off, but I really must allow myself lots and lots of quiet. And I liked in your illustration of the finger pointing at the moon. As I start to speak, it's kind of like a prayer. It's not the exact word, but that sense of wu wei. I want my words to be the finger.
Yes.
pointing at the moon. I don't want them to be the center of what's going on. So if my words point to something compassionate and I'd like my words to point to the true nature of each person's heart. So maybe there's not a moon out there that I'm pointing at, but I'm pointing at the true nature of my own heart and pointing at the true nature of your heart. And if my words direct you there, then that's wonderful. But you're right. The minute we say it, that's not quite it. But that's okay. We can say it. And that's one of the nice things of Lao Tzu's idea that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, because that stops us from being dogmatic. That allows us to say things, understanding that they're not the final truth, but we get to say them anyway. And we don't have to defend them as if they were the truth. We don't have to argue about them. We don't have to posit some sort of a God or some sort of a doctrine as the truth, because the minute we say it, that's not it. So that frees us to say it with a degree of humility.
Mm-hmm.
So I can speak.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak passionately,
Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge that that's not something that needs to be defended is kind of nice.
Well, the way we put it here, because we're very Socratic, is we believe in truth pursued, not truth possessed.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Because then that allows the words a certain freedom and a certain lightness, because you're saying and signaling in advance. You're not speaking because you know, you're speaking because you're living in a certain question that you want to bring to conscious attention. And I think that it's in that spirit of Wu Wei, as you've been talking about, where true dialogue really takes place, because both people in the dialogue, or however many people are in the dialogue, are offering their words in a mutual inquiry. And the goal is not so much knowledge, but the transformation of the soul.
Yes, because you're offering yourself then.
Yeah, exactly.
Your words are a window to yourself. And when you're in a group of people who are revealing through their words themselves, then you're in the presence of the mystery.
Yeah. And I think, just to dwell on it just another moment, because I think it's so profoundly true, but also urgent in our culture, this distinction between dialogue and argument. I mean, that admonition of your mentor early on, don't argue with anyone, I think is really true. That we should be seeking dialogue in a spirit of inquiry, knowing that the finger is not the moon. And whenever it slips into argument, whatever is at stake, we just need to stop because we're no longer the finger and we've lost track of the moon.
Yeah, I like that. And dialogue can only be offered; it can't be forced.
Yeah.
You know, I can. Well, let's have a dialogue. Well, I'm only in control of. I'm going to offer, and if you then return the offer, a dialogue exists.
Yeah.
But it's kind of dangerous to set up a dialogue because often we say, okay, let's set up a dialogue. Translate. Let's convince each other.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so thank you for that. And as we bring this session to a close, given the fact you've been steeped in the Tao Te Ching for decades now, would love to have you just leave us with some of the pearls. If you had to choose two or three of the passages or lines in those 81 verses, each one of which is just incredibly profound. I've always said that of all the classic works, the Tao Te Ching is my personal favorite, because I think it was the one book of deep antiquity that knew it didn't know. And but I would love to have you share with us any of what, after all these years, are pearls from the Tao Te Ching that you would like to share.
Well, I've already said those who speak don't know, those who know don't speak. But one of my favorite chapters is chapter 11, and it gets translated various ways, but it talks about the still point at the center. It says the spokes of a wheel make up the wheel, but it's the still point at the center that allows the wheel to turn. A clay makes up a pot, but it's the emptiness inside the pot that allows the pot to be useful. And a house is made up of walls, but it's the room inside that allows it to be a home. And then ends with, therefore we move from emptiness and stillness, and we teach without agenda, and we act without expectation.
By the way, do you have a favorite translator of the Tao Te Ching? Would it be Stephen Mitchell or?
I like Stephen Mitchell. I've got my own translations out. Stephen Mitchell's is probably the most popular and accessible of the translations. Jonathan Starr has a lovely translation out that's more literal than Stephen Mitchell's is. And John Starr's book contains an appendix in the back of all the Chinese characters and their possible meanings. So I like John's expanded version. But if you have to pick one, Stephen Mitchell's or Ursula Le Guin. Ursula Le Guin wrote one from a feminist perspective that's just beautiful.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that one. I'll
Yes.
look that one up because I love the different translations. Because the Tao Te Ching is one of those works that is so deep that when you refract it out through language in another language, all kinds of different interpretive fractals emerge given the personality. But an Ursula Le Guin translation of the Tao Te Ching must be just extraordinary.
It's extraordinary. Back up. That would be my favorite choice. Ursula did a wonderful job.
That's beautiful. Well, Bill, thank you so much. You've graced us today with the presence that we needed. I feel like your presence after the 5-day summit on Ukraine has been like the balm of Gilead. Just saying, slow down, sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Try to make the moment last.
Ultimately, it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, a Taoist would be characterized as a short-term pessimist, long-term optimist.
Yeah, those are wise words. So thank you so much. I hope we can have you back again. And that'll do it for us for today, everyone. the Tao Te Ching and the wisdom of the ages in relationship to our social activism is always a timely reminder that we need to act without acting, and we need to be deeply in the Tao in order for whatever we do say and whatever we do has an efficacy that comes from eternity, not just our ephemeral personality and emotional whims. So, Bill, thank you for that illumination today. You're all welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat that Stan has just put in, and we'll see you then again tomorrow on Humanity Rising. Once again, same time, same station. Thank you, Bill.
Nice to meet you.
Sublime
Nice
session.
to meet you. Nice to be part of it. Thank you.
All right. Be well. Bye-bye.